Hello there, and welcome to the latest edition for How to Run Cyberpunk Red. We've been going through the basic stuff for the Cyberpunk Red TTRPG put out by R. Talsorian Games, and now we're going to dive into some of the meat of character creation, which is the LifePath options. And we're going to go through this step by step and kind of dive into how this all works and what all you get access to as part of character creation. And this is probably one of the most in-depth character creation suites that I have seen for a tabletop role-playing game. So there's a lot of stuff to dive into. For this, I would strongly recommend picking up the Cyberpunk Red core rulebook. Link for it will be in the description below. And make sure to start from there. First thing you're going to look at is page 44, and you're going to need a D10 for these options, a 10-sided die, and then later on, when we get into the role-specific life path options, you'll need a 6-sided die. Now, the D10 is mainly if you want to randomize your results. You can just as easily pick from the available options when you're going through each step in the life path as you're going through it. Before we dive into the meat of this video, first things first, let me get some shameless promotion out of the way. Definitely check out the link tree in my bio. It has links to all of my stuff on the web, including my book series, The Adelante Chronicles. You can also check out my Patreon, where I have early access videos and exclusives that are only available on there. The link for that is also in my bio on the link tree. Thank you so much for my indulging of that. Just wanted to get my stuff out there. And as always, if you like my content, definitely make sure to hit that like and subscribe button, as well as the bell icon, so you get notifications when I put out new content. So first thing you dive into with the life path is your cultural origins. And you can find this on page 45 of the Cyberpunk Red core rulebook. So one thing you first start off with here is understanding how languages work a little bit. And in this case, automatically you start off with 4 ranks in the language skill called street slang. And that's sort of the pidgin English or something like that of the everyday people that you interact with. And it essentially is the shorthand language that everybody understands and knows. Then, based on your cultural region that you come from, you have a number of languages that you can pick from, and with the language you decide, you gain 4 ranks in the language skill for that language. So, for example, if you were to pick North American as your cultural region, the languages that you could potentially start off with would be things like Chinese, Cree, Creole, English, French, Navajo, or Spanish, versus if you were starting off as Sub-Saharan African, you would potentially start off with things like Arabic or English, Lingala, Oromo, Swahili, Yoruba, Portuguese. So it definitely has a flavor of where your character's cultural background starts from, not necessarily your ethnicity, but where your cultural background comes from, and that ties into the potential languages that you would have learned growing up alongside learning the street slang. Now, once you move on from the cultural background, your next stop is going to be to pick your personality. And there are 10 options to choose from. And again, you can roll a d10 to randomly assign this, or you can pick. But these are a baseline for how your character kind of starts off. And you could be things like rebellious, antisocial, and violent, to silly and fluff-headed, or maybe friendly and outgoing. And again, these are sort of your baseline traits of who is this person starting off. Now, once you get past your personality, then you're starting to get into more personalized items, in particular, your clothing style and your hairstyle. Now, for these, if you're going to do random, I would strongly suggest not. This is something you may want to consider just picking to make sure it matches. Although, to be fair, given how wild Cyberpunk is and these styles in Cyberpunk can be, then maybe randomness will work out in your favor. You never know. But to give you an idea of what you're looking at, so for clothing styles, it's things like generic chic, which is standard, modular, colorful, attire versus high fashion, which is haute couture, designer, and exclusive, versus things like bohemian, which is folksy, free spirited, and retro. Now, flip side of that is the hairstyles where you get things like mohawks, short and spiked hair, bald, neat and short, striped hair. All of those things can play into it. So you want to try and match these up, or maybe make them as wildly varied as possible, entirely up to you. Now, after you've chosen your clothing and hairstyle, you're then going to pick an affectation that you are never without. And these are little things about your character that you always have with you. So things like you always have your tattoos. You love to have nose rings or tongue piercings or something like that. Or maybe it's strange fingernail implants where your fingernails are unique and separate. And it's just a little thing that your character has that kind of helps you stand out a little bit more and maybe gets you thinking along the lines of why would this character have this little affectation. Next up are going to be another twofer, which is motivations and relationships. So motivations are the thing you value the most, whether that's money, honor, vengeance, power, things like that. And then the other side of that is how do you feel about most people, where you could be like, I like almost everyone, I stay neutral, every person is a valuable individual, people are untrustworthy, don't depend on anyone. So it varies deeply, and that can tie into the personality that you picked earlier in this life path. So again, randomness can help you, but sometimes it may make for a very disjointed character. So you may want to consider just picking options that work based on the character concept that you're going to work off of. Moving on from there, you have a couple of things for the most valued person in your life and your most valuable possession in your life. So for the person that you value the most, these could be things like a parent, a lover, yourself, a teacher or a mentor, a personal hero, someone that is very valuable to who you are as a person. And again, that leads into your backstory and trying to develop your character into a much more three-dimensional person rather than a two-dimensional sheet of paper. Then moving on from that is your most valued possession. So that could be a piece of clothing, a photograph, a recording, a toy, a letter, something that is small, that's innocuous, but it means a great deal to your character. And then you can sort of develop why it means so much to your character and what that is. Now, diving into the next section is another one where randomness from dice rolls could potentially muck things up a little bit. So again, this might be a section where you want to really think about the background for your character's family, why that happened, that led to where your character is currently inhabiting their space, and make sure that it kind of connects the dots sufficiently from point to point. So starting off, you have your original family background. And what this means is, what was your family a part of? And it starts from things like corporate executives. So you were part of the 1%, and you grew up wealthy, you grew up in luxury homes, you had private security, you went to big name private schools, you had everything at your disposal. Now, that obviously would work potentially for an exec as your role. Maybe not. Maybe it could be something different. Another option later on in the list are things like combat zoners. So you grew up with a gang. Your home was some kind of decaying building in one of the combat zones that had been heavily fortified. You were sometimes going hungry, but You regularly had the ability to score a comfortable bed and potentially a meal, and you were probably homeschooled. This type of family background would not necessarily benefit an exec, but maybe you're one of those characters that came up through the ranks of that kind of deprivation and made a name for themselves. Again, think about your character concepts and what backgrounds work best with that, and pick from the list, or again, use the die roll, let it be random, and go from there. Now, from family background, you're going to move into your environment. And this is where your character grew up, the kinds of places that you would hang out in with maybe siblings or friends. And again, you want to try and make sure that this matches up with your family background. Because obviously, if your parents come from a corporate exec background, then you're probably not going to use the option for you ran around on the street with no adult supervision, versus maybe you grew up safe in a corp zone that was walled off from the rest of the city. Whereas if you were a urban homeless or maybe a mega structure Warren rat, then you're probably going to be in the ruins of a deserted town or in a huge mega structure building that was controlled by a corp or the city. Kind of makes sense if you match those two up. Then you get to the family crisis, and this is a very simple idea because in the time of the Red, this is a post-massive war society. This is a society of deprivation where everyone is scrambling to try and survive amidst this crumbling infrastructure from this massive war that occurred about 20 years in the past. And from here, you choose the family crisis of what happened to your family, how did things go bad? And all of these are sort of tragic ideas. So it's things like your family lost everything because of a betrayal, or maybe they lost everything because of bad management, or maybe your family was scattered to the winds due to some major misfortune. All of these are tragedies that hit your family that have put you on the path to becoming an edge runner as you start your character path. Now, from the family tragedy and family crisis, now you dive into a little bit more of personal backgrounds. And here's where things get a little bit interesting, and you're going to need a die roll for this. So this is where the D10 comes into play. So you're going to be looking at 3 new categories: your friends, your enemies, and your tragic love affairs. And what you're going to do is you're going to roll 1d10 and subtract 7 from that number, which means if you roll 7 or lower, you're not going to get anything for these 3 options. And that's okay. You don't have to have them, but obviously this is another one where you could just decide you want to have this in the background. I personally work with the idea of just roll the dice and let it fall where they may. Now, depending on how many friends your character starts with, you'll roll a d10 for each of those, or pick from the list on this page. And it's things like someone who is an older sibling to you, or maybe someone who was a younger sibling to you. Maybe it's a former lover. Maybe it's an old enemy that became a friend, or someone you just knew on the street. So you would want to pick from those options and make them work, and then start developing who these characters are and work with your GM to figure out who these people are in your life, where are they at potentially, and how they could come into play in the stories that you're going to be developing. Next, you move on to your enemies. And once again, you're going to roll 1d10, and you're going to figure out how many enemies you have by subtracting 7 from the roll. So again, you can have a maximum of 3. This one's a little bit more in-depth. So once you've made that roll and you determine how many enemies that you have, then you're looking at what types of enemies that you have. And these are things like an ex-friend, an ex-lover, a childhood enemy, someone that you worked for, someone that worked for you, a corporate executive, maybe it's a government official. Then it's who caused the problem, who's been wronged. Maybe you're the one that wronged them, or they're the one that wronged you. What did they do? Maybe they deserted or betrayed each other. Maybe there was some major public humiliation. Maybe you just don't like each other. Once you've picked who did what to who, Then the next question becomes, what can this enemy throw at you? So this is where it becomes, okay, maybe it's just that person, this enemy. Maybe it's themselves and a few friends. Maybe it's an entire gang. Maybe it's a small corporation. Maybe this person can throw an entire government agency at you. So this could go from this person's a minor annoyance to this is a full-fledged big bad evil guy that you've now just given your GM to use to make your character's life hell. That's the fun part of this kind of character creation suite. And then with Sweet Revenge is the last part of this section, which is what happens when you and your enemies finally come face to face. So are you going to avoid each other? Do you go into a murderous rage? Do you backstab them indirectly? Do you verbally attack them? Are you trying to actually unalive them? All of these options are available, but it's where you decide how the enemy relationship is going to go. And then last but not least, for this little section, you have tragic love affairs. Because again, this is cyberpunk, and this is a world rife with tragedy. So it doesn't matter why these tragic love affairs ended, although there are options for what happened. Essentially, these all ended badly. So you'll roll a d10, subtract 7, which once again means you'll have a maximum of 3. And then depending on how many you rolled, then you can look at the chart for what happened. And these are things like your lover died in an accident. Your lover vanished mysteriously. It just didn't work out. Your lover went cyber psycho. Maybe they unalived themselves. Maybe a rival cut them out and took them out for... or maybe they've been imprisoned or exiled. So all of these things can play a factor. Last but not least, for the life path goals that we're going to cover on this video are the life goals for your character. And these are just little things of what motivates your character to move forward. So things like gaining power and control, getting off the street and making a better life for yourself, getting what you feel is rightfully yours, save someone from the issues that were found in your family background and family crisis. Maybe you just want to gain fame and recognition. You want to try and tailor this one as well based on what you've been building up to this point and the character ideas based on the role that you have selected. So a lot of this is you're going to want to pick your role before starting your life path so you have a clear idea of, okay, let's say, for example, I'm building a solo. What kind of person and what kind of background would fit well with a soldier of fortune who is, keenly attuned to and very proficient in violence, versus if you're going to build a tech, which is someone who has a knack for machines and for building things. That kind of person would have a very different background from a solo. So again, think about your role, think about where you want to build this character and what it's going to go to, and then build your life path accordingly from there. But that about covers it for the life path portion. We're going to dive into the next section of character creation, which is going to be going over your stats and how those stats are generated, as well as diving into the skills, how skills are divvied out. It's going to be the meat and potatoes of character creation. There are role-specific life paths, so each role, like solo, rocker boy, all of them have their own specific life path options to help flesh out your character even more. But I'm going to dive into those as I do the full videos for each life path and how the builds and breakdowns for those characters could potentially work. But thank you so much for listening to my video on how to run Cyberpunk Red for life paths. I hope you've enjoyed it. Once again, if you've liked this, please click that like and subscribe button, as well as check out my other stuff in the description to see my other stuff on the web. Thank you so much. Have a great day.